Last year, I released a video review on the Steven Universe movie, and although I didn't say this in that video, my greatest hope for future was that it provide the series with a decent conclusion. I'm gonna say this at the expense of sounding like a broken record, but the ending for the original is the worst ending to any story I've ever experienced in my entire life. It was far from conclusive. If anything, the finale gave me more questions than answers. On top of that, the message it left viewers with was absolutely deplorable. I was livid after watching Change Your Mind, and I have no doubt I would have scripted and edited an hour-long video venting about my time with the show if we weren't promised a feature-length film at the end of the year. I discounted the original show because we had the movie. I discounted the movie because we had Future. I can't discount Future because it is the ending. And if this is the ending, how does it stack up? Is this the conclusion of Steven Universe I was so desperately hoping for? This show was a colossal waste of my time and energy. I'm not saying this for the sake of being vindictive, that's how I really feel. If you enjoyed it, more power to you. I'm not trying to take that away from you. I just can't defend this story because I feel it does more harm than good. So I figured I'd make this video explaining why this shouldn't be championed and how it doesn't work as a narrative. I care a lot about this universe and these characters, which is why I want to talk about Future, even if I don't have many positive things to say. This video means a lot to me, so all I ask is you watch until the end and let me know your thoughts after. Failing to understand the implications of fast-forwarding years in a story is the fatal flaw one can make when using this device. A lot can happen in a month, let alone a couple of years. So when arriving from point A to point B, I expect the narrative to be entirely different. The purpose of a time skip is to enact meaningful change, and Steven Universe Future is another shining example of how not to do that. Originally, I was going to talk at you for 5 minutes about why Future's a temporal failure, but I think it'd be much more effective for me to show you a great example of a time skip and just let the contrast speak for itself. The transition from Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z is arguably the most famous time skip in all of history, and I'm positive this story popularized the device in modern anime. I find it fitting I'm using it as an example since Steven Universe is convinced it's a DBZ's spiritual successor or something. Funnily enough, what makes Steven Universe similar to Dragon Ball isn't its fight scenes, but the fact that 60% of it is fucking filler. Before this point in the story, Dragon Ball was very fantastical and focused on the mystical and spiritual elements of the world Goku was living in. A lot of the crazy occurrences and people Goku would meet on his adventures could be attributed to that. Those were the results of the conditions of the world he was living in. When Raditz touches down on Earth, Dragon Ball undergoes a paradigm shift. There's nothing mystical about him. In fact, everything about his character is rooted in science and logistics. He traveled there in a space pod, dons militaristic battle armor, and uses a compact computer to gauge the combat power of living organisms. He's unlike anything we've ever seen. When he meets our hero, Raditz takes this even further by revealing Goku is his younger brother and an alien sent to Earth to wipe out all living creatures. Raditz is only on Earth now because he and 2 other aliens need Goku's help in conquering another world, implying there's an entire universe of obstacles for the protagonist to overcome. Raditz steals Goku's son, that's a thing now, and leaves his brother with an ultimatum: kill 100 humans by the next day or die. Desperate to recover Gohan, Goku teams up with his old enemy and sets off to confront Raditz. That's how you do a time skip. In just 4 chapters, Toriyama sets Dragon Ball on an entirely different path by establishing a new tone, new dynamics, and leaving the reader with implications of new settings and threats. The only thing that remains constant here are the main characters because it's still the same story. So, how does this relate to Steven Universe Future? From Change Your Mind to Little Homeschool, what's new? There's the introduction of Little Homeworld, the assimilation of uncorrupted gems into Beach City, and the deconstruction of Era 2 gemmed society. These are all significant changes on paper, but considering none have a significant impact on Future's narrative, I wouldn't call them justifications for a time skip. The point I'm trying to make here is this future story is one that didn't have to be told in the future. The core of Steven's arc in Future is insecurity and dealing with the growing complexities of what it means to be him. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because the character went through a near identical arc in the original show. What's the point of jumping forward 3 years just to tell the exact same story? There isn't any point. As I said before, a time skip should always enact some kind of meaningful change, which allows for a writer to tell a story they couldn't prior. Steven Universe Future is a story they could have told prior, but because of the nature of Steven's character in the original, I'm not sure it would have worked well there either. Future would work much more effectively if it were a standalone piece. Unfortunately, it's the third act of what was an ongoing series. Steven Universe was littered with problems, and I'm positive I don't have to explain how, since you probably already know at this point. One of those problems was the titular character himself. While not in a literal sense, Steven was a fucking god. He was the perfect person, which inadvertently made him a terrible character. Steven had little to no character development in the original show. That's because he was a Purity Sue, a character that is overly positive by design and lacks any real flaws. This child was meant to be perfect from the very first episode. Characters like Steven work best in a mentor role because while mentors usually have flaws, they've already matured into complete people. I'm entirely sure Garnet was intended to be a mentor character for Steven, but somewhere along the journey these roles were switched and he began looking out for her more than she did him. By the time the show's over, Steven has vored the role of every single crystal gem. There's literally a scene in Future where Steven vents about how sick he is of the gems being so knowledgeable, wise, and mature when he was always those things, not them. This is all very odd, considering Steven is still just a kid. If you ask anyone, I've no doubt they'd say Steven's immaturity and his naive perspective on life are his two biggest flaws. And in any well-written story, those flaws would have a huge impact on his position in the narrative, his development, and the conflict he faces. In Steven Universe, Steven is rewarded for being a starry-eyed child with an unrealistic viewpoint on the world and how it works. Every now and again, Steven does something reckless that endangers his own life and those of the people around him. But instead of anyone dying or him being forced to face the repercussions of his actions, he's patted on the back and put on a pedestal. If flaws never hurt a character, they're not flaws, they're practically just character traits. As I said before, naivety can be a crippling flaw in any other story because it cements a character in ignorance. Regardless of how much one believes in something, it's not guaranteed to be true. The world doesn't bend to one's will. A story is interesting because there's that clash of ideologies, that clash of wills, there's conflict. Steven Universe has no conflict because everyone ends up submitting to or agreeing with Steven. The only character in the entire show to give Steven's beliefs even the slightest bit of friction is Jasper, and we all know how that ended. Not even White Diamond, the gem who was so firmly rooted in her belief of natural order, she colonized the entire universe, crumbles the moment Steven begins spouting his peace and love mumbo jumbo. Steven literally reshapes the world around him to align with his beliefs, and that's simply bad writing. It's not like the characters treat Steven as if he should be a moral standard. He's objectively the moral center of the entire universe. Steven was the perfect being, and that's why it makes no sense his arc in Future is about him coming to terms with his flaws. Steven has no flaws, and he isn't a character, he's a caricature. A vessel for the creators to impart their wisdom onto the viewer. What a crock of shit. Steven should have been flawed, and he should have faced conflict stemming from that, causing him to undergo any arc like the one he did in Future. But because he's perfect from the get-go, he has to be written as an entirely different person when the time comes to develop him. Nice. This severely lessens the impact of the changes he undergoes in Future, because the entire time I'm watching the arc unfold, all I can think to myself is this isn't the same character, which makes the entire show feel disingenuous. Future started out pretty strong, and if I had to give this show anything, it would be that. The first series of episodes was a very good setup to an arc that could have left people with a very meaningful message. Obviously, there are flaws in the execution here and there, but for the most part, I'm pretty impressed. I think that's because my problem with Future isn't necessarily the story itself, but its main character and the way it all ends. Steven Universe Future concluded with Steven leaving everyone and everything behind, and while that might be a solution for others, this doesn't address or solve any of the problems he was suffering from. As a matter matter of fact, it's just more of him running away. Future begins with Steven trying to fix Jasper as she's rejected his new gem society and what it stands for. This leads to a confrontation in which Jasper tells Steven he's the only one who needs fixing and is projecting himself onto others. Jasper's words must have hit home to some extent since they caused Steven to enter a new pink state. Sugar describes this phenomenon as making him stronger, making him faster, making him heavier. It's making him whatever he needs to be to get out of a life-threatening situation. The problem is that it's not a life-threatening situation, but his body has learned to react that way. His gem has learned to react that way. So that is what's happening when he's turning pink. That reaction is his life-saving instinct. So the Dragon Ball parallels continue, huh? Yeah, Pink Steven is Ultra Instinct, but for a little baby. We'll see Steven enter this pink state every time he gets a little rattled, and for as much flack as I'm giving it now, I do think it's a pretty cool plot device. So I'm sad it wasn't used to its fullest extent, a thought I'll delve further into later on. Interestingly, the only episode where Steven is in character is the first. After leaving Jasper, he gives an entire monologue on how he's genuinely excited there's more for him to discover about himself, even going as far as to call life a wonderful mystery. It's a very optimistic perspective to take and also stands in stark contrast to those he adopts later on, cementing this idea that future Steven is an entirely different character. Steven's insecurities are solidified in the next episode. After Steven's attempts to fix Amethyst's gem mentorship program leaves Beach City up in flames, after which Steven is left unsure of the path he's chosen in life and which he'll take in the future. It's very clear Steven's issue here is existential. He's questioning who he is and where he comes from. I went back to watch a couple of episodes just to make sure I was correct in saying this, but Steven's family proves they absolutely adore him time and time again. They make an effort to spend time with him, open up to him, and most important of all, understand and support the choices he's making. So tell me, why is it that his insecurities are being resolved with a hug? A hug! That's mad disrespectful. What I take away from this scene is if you're depressed or feeling unsure of yourself, just get someone to hug you. I understand some people are interpreting this as having your loved ones remind you of who you are, but if you're unable to recognize that yourself, how is having others do it for you going to make any difference? People who suffer from issues similar to Steven's know they're loved and important in others' lives, but that doesn't mean anything because they're not comfortable with themselves. How are you going to dedicate an entire episode to preaching to the audience about what mental illness is, but not even understand it yourselves? Steven spends the entirety of Future whining and complaining about how much he hates his family and where he comes from. He blames his mom, he blames his dad, he blames his aunts, he blames everyone but himself. The reality of doing that is that no matter how much you shift the blame and who you place it on, the past won't change. He's going to be Rose's son and a diamond until the day he dies, and that will never change. What can change, however, is the future. This kid saved the entire universe as Rose's son, as a diamond. Just because they were bad people doesn't mean he has to be. At the end of the day, who he is relies solely on himself. I mean, look at what he and Amethyst did in episode 2. They wouldn't have been able to save those people if it wasn't for the diamond powers Steven so adamantly detests. He should have ended this arc with him accepting himself for who he is, diamond and all. I would have loved it if Steven actually adopted his diamond state as his natural one and made the most of his life in Beach City. Sure, he'd be a diamond now, but that doesn't mean he isn't Steven Universe. That would have left me with a really powerful message about maturing and coming to terms with who you are. Instead, we're left with him running away and starting a new life elsewhere. Am I supposed to pat the Crewniverse on its back for attempting to talk about mental illness? Am I supposed to consider Steven Universe Future successful because some people understood how Steven felt? No. I'm going to hold them accountable for what they made. These people told a story that only serves to dramatize mental illness because there's nothing to take away from here. There's no message, there's no payoff, there's nothing. Despite its flaws, I still liked Steven Universe. Even if it began to falter around its ending, there were a ton of positive messages one could take away from any other point in the show. The exact same could be said about the movie. I ended my entire review by saying even though the movie had a ton of problems, it still left me feeling something meaningful. I can't say the same for Future because it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. Well, if it's worth anything, at least the series ended how it started. A giant fucking mess. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching till the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like and comment down below telling me your thoughts. I'm really interested in having a conversation with you guys about this, so get to it. If you're interested in seeing more from me, be sure to hit that subscribe button and I will see you guys next time. Take care.